All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Joel Patterson, the founder of the Vested Group, and today I'm happy to be able to present Heidi Convery, who is our Strengths Finder coach. Strengths Finder has really changed our world over the last few years. I think it's been about 3 years that we've been using it, and really what it's allowed us to do is help people understand themselves a little bit better. It's very positive focus is one of the things that I love about it the most is that you learn about your top strengths and you know what your bottom ones are, but you don't spend a ton of time focusing on how you're going to fix those. It's really about leveraging what you like to do, what brings you energy. And Heidi has done a great job of bringing that into the fold of the Vested Group and really showing us ways that we can leverage that in our day-to-day lives, both at work and at home. I can't say enough about Heidi. I won't steal all of her thunder today, but she's done things from coaching us individually to working with teams so that they are most effectively working through any kind of issues. If we aren't quite sure how to mentor somebody, she can give us tips and tricks on how to manage them a little bit better. She's got lots of energy. She's always full of real talk, and just love having her as part of the team. So without further ado, Heidi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm excited to be with everybody today. I have had to really force myself to be okay with doing everything virtually. I don't know about some of you, I'm for sure a in-person person. So I've tried to figure out ways in which I can feel like I'm connecting with you without really freaking people out by being like way up in the camera screen. So if you just will kind of bear with me in my pumped up nature to be with you this morning virtually. So I want to tell you a little bit about me first. Actually, the beginning of our time this morning is just going to kind of be me chatting with you like this, and then I'll share a screen in a little bit and give you some specifics that you can take away, but want to connect with you a little bit first. So I've had a coaching business here in Dallas for a little over 4 years and was in higher education prior to that. And I feel like it's important to understand a little bit about, especially for someone who does some coaching, sort of why they're in that space. And, I can remember all throughout my career really feeling this desperate need to make sure that people understand how great they are. And it sounds a little bit cheesy, I feel like, when I say that out loud. But it kind of deep down is, and once I took StrengthsFinder, began to understand my talent a long time ago, I realized that deep need was really rooted in my own strengths, includer being one, right? Like I really desperately want people to feel as though they belong. But when it comes to a coach kind of coming into an organization and helping folks learn a little bit more about themselves, or just working with people individually in coaching, the main reason why I attached so much to StrengthsFinder was a lot about what Joel was just talking about, recognizing that we can spend a lot of time in understanding what's great about ourselves and get somewhere with that. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do a little bit today. I know that there's probably a wide variety of folks who are watching who have had different experiences or no experience at all with StrengthsFinder. So some of you, maybe you took the StrengthsFinder assessment, like 10 years ago, and it would be a miracle if you could log in and find your results. Maybe some of you took it just for this assessment, so you have your printout, if you even did that. And then I think I know there's some folks that are watching that have had more extensive interaction with strengths. They've learned more about theirs, or they learn more about the strengths of their colleagues. So we have a wide range of people, I think, on the call. And with that in mind, I wanted to really focus on strengths integration. And I think you can watch this webinar from two different perspectives. If you're an individual who is in here with us today and you really aren't thinking about strengths in terms of your workplace, but you're really thinking about it independently. So you're just kind of, I know my strengths. Is there something I can do to use them more effectively and more intentionally if my business isn't doing anything with it? I think you can watch this from that perspective and get something out of it. I also think the other side, if you maybe are a decision maker in your organization, or maybe you have some autonomy to make some decisions with your small team, and you think strengths could be a way that we could take it to the next level in terms of engaging our folks, or motivating our people to get a little bit more excited about what they're doing and tap into what their natural talent is. You could approach this from that perspective as well. So I think basically, if you're a human and you're watching our webinar, I think this is going to be good for you. That's my professional opinion. So I'm wondering, I want to take you first to think back, and this could be a current reality for you, or it could be, you were in a position at some point and this definitely happened. Have you ever been at work and a new initiative was coming out like Strengths? So we might say it could be Strengths Finder, it could have been Myers-Briggs, could have been DISC, True Colors, right? The whole range, Culture Index. So there was a big buzz, kind of a little bit of excitement to take an assessment, learn about everybody, right? And everyone took it, and then maybe you did some kind of, half-day workshop together to learn about the results, right? Or maybe a little 2-hour meeting or something with your team. And you go over it and you're kind of pumped. Oh, this is super interesting. Oh, your positivity, that's great, right? And then the next day, you remember 15%, maybe, about what you talked about the day before. And then by 2 months in, conservatively, nothing's happening with it, right? It kind of fell flat. You might have some people's strengths up on the wall somewhere, or there's an email, or someone might mention it every now and then, but that's pretty much it. I think that's the reality for so much of us when it comes to initiatives to try and figure out who our people are, right? Gallup actually has some, they're the creators of StrengthsFinder and the research behind it, and they have statistics that show that a lot of times when we are introducing something like StrengthsFinder, a personality assessment or a thought assessment, right, and we do nothing with it, that can actually be more detrimental than if you never took it before, right? And really, that's because at that point, they sort of stay as a label, which boxes you in. Have you ever felt, for sure, in fact, I think the first time really that I took StrengthsFinder, I felt that way, where I was like, you know what? Okay, I agree with most of these results. They sound a little bit like me. But now, am I going to be labeled by that? Like, people are going to just assume things based on what my top 5 words are, and that's it. And that's really, I think, where a lot of our history and experience with something like StrengthsFinder has happened before. And it breaks my heart a little bit actually, no, that's not true. It breaks my heart a lot as a coach, because the value that we can get as human beings by really understanding that nobody else is going to contribute what we do, what we can, and be given an opportunity and an environment to actually use that is just, it kills me, right? To think about that so much of our work life is going around with this unused talent. I think about like Serena Williams, if she had all of this tennis talent and she just walked around and never used it, right? Maybe she picked up a racket every now and then, but didn't actually dive in. People did invest in her talent in doing that. The sports world would be missing so much. It's the exact same concept with your talent, with your strengths. We're walking around with so much natural, raw, individual, unique talent, and not actually utilizing it, right? Encouraging one another to utilize our strengths more. So I wanted today to really be about a couple of ways that I think are the most effective when it comes to your own strengths development or introducing strengths within an organization. I obviously am going to be talking specifically about StrengthsFinder because that's my expertise. But I will tell you, if you feel really connected to another kind of assessment, I think what I'm talking about today, for the most part, can be applied overall. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us to look at a couple of slides together. And here we go. All right, I just need to move this guy around a little bit. There we go. Okay. All right, so making the most of your strengths, intentionality in the workplace. And I know with the vested group folks, they hear me chat a ton about intentionality when I'm doing one-on-one sessions with individuals, and that's the effort that you personally need to take to figure out how to utilize your strengths in the best way, right? And that takes a little bit of effort. It takes some work. And I think that's probably why for a lot of organizations, new initiatives like StrengthsFinder don't play out in the long run. They're sort of a short-term thing. Part of it's because I think of a lack of a coach coming in to help you with that process, at least on the forefront. And then two, everyone understanding that it's not an overnight process. So it really does take intentional effort every day on our part. So here are the three areas. When I think about how I help to integrate strengths into a business, or if I'm working with someone individually, how I help them really use their strengths on a daily basis, I think there's three areas that make the most sense to me when it comes to strengths implementation. So the first one being enhancing communication. Honestly, that's probably where I spend the most time coaching. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in a second when it comes to managers to employees and what that communication change can be and how you can use your strengths there, or employee to employee, right? You might just sort of assume that Karen, everything's tied to her crazy personality, but a lot of it is actually tied to her strengths too. So using that in communication to with folks that you work with. The teams and roles part, I get asked a ton about, are my strengths fit for my job, or vice versa? Does my job fit my strengths? So what does it mean role-wise in your talent? How can you use those in what you're doing right now? And then teams in regards to forming a team. So if you form committees, if you're in an opportunity at work where you're trying to figure out, maybe I do want to add something to my plate. Maybe I want to be involved in an HR committee that I wasn't, in before. What does that look like? So being able to use your strengths in decisions, practical decisions that you do on a daily basis at work. And then the third area is navigating change. We're in this just gigantic time of change at the moment, probably the biggest transition most of us have ever been in. And of course, over the last 3 months, my coaching for individuals and teams has been primarily focused on coaching within a lockdown or within quarantine. So what does it look like when you're working from home based on your strengths, and helping managers understand a little bit more about why some people have adjusted the way that they have, right? Why is it easier for some folks and more difficult for others? And why do some people have these just up and down, emotions through this, and figuring out how to connect with others? And some people seem to be doing incredibly well. So much of that is tied to your talent and the needs that our strengths have. So I wanted to hit on that because that's our current reality, but also because change is inevitable all the time at work. So I think we can take what we're doing right now with COVID and our transition and make it applicable for the future that's hopefully not pandemic related. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is communication. I wanted to focus on two types of communication and how your strengths can be involved in both of those. So the first part is manager to employee, or employee to manager. Arguably the more important relationship that you have at work, right? Probably also the most strained when it comes to communication, because there's that barrier of hierarchy there that can be a little bit strange. And so for me, when I'm talking to managers specifically in one-on-one coaching sessions, I'm really helping them figure out and understand better the strengths of their people so that they can know how to individually manage them in a way that's going to be most energizing and engaging for the employee. And employee too, I have a lot of times folks will come in and say, I don't know how to tell my manager that I cannot stand that she does this. And so then we'll talk a little bit about the manager's strengths, right? What are maybe some needs of the strengths that she has that come across that way, that communicate that way? So that manager-employee relationship is a big one. So we'll talk a little bit about the communication between those two and how you can use your strengths. And then the second one is employee to employee, right? You realize we spend more waking hours with our colleagues than we do our family. I mean, let that sink for a second, right? Like you, maybe for the most part, maybe chose the people that you're living in your home with right, to spend time with. But the people that are around you, this person is sitting next to you, or, that you're in a meeting with, you didn't necessarily choose. And so understanding the strengths of your colleagues is absolutely vital to enhanced communication, understanding why they do the things that they do, why they really latch onto one specific thing in a meeting that you just cannot understand, right? And being able to have a conversation with them about their, anticipate the needs that they have. So those two types of communication I wanted to focus on most because I think we deal with those in the raw more often. So the first one, communication with your colleagues, the why people do what they do. So I think two ways that you can utilize your strengths, or that strengths can really benefit the communication that you have with your colleagues. The first one being natural relationship development. Now, if you have taken StrengthsFinder before and you're looking at your top 5 strengths, or you're looking at your top 10, if you have relator anywhere in there, I'm just going to pick on relators for a minute. If you have relator anywhere in there, I'm going to guarantee you right now that you absolutely loathe surface level team builders. Am I right? Like those little just kind of, oh, let's get together and learn a little bit more about one another. Like the only thing worse than that would be someone microwaving fish in the kitchen, in the office, and like barely, right? I mean, you just can't, you can't state it. And that's because relator is a strength that values and gets energy from deeper relationships with a small amount of people. They don't need or crave or desire acquaintance relationships, right? So any kind of let's like deeply share really quickly with somebody that I don't know, or let's just keep it surface level and chat, it's just not their jam, right? Okay, well, but you still need to have some relationship development in a workplace. So I think strengths is a way that you can naturally connect with somebody else without necessarily having to have any of those little team builder type of deals, or feeling as though you've got to share your life story with the person sitting next to you, right? It's a natural, immediate connection. Maybe you have your top 5 and you're looking at the person next to you and you both have strategic. There's an immediate connection, right? At least you know about that person. They think similarly as you do on a couple of things. They're always thinking about what's the best way for me to get from A to B. What are a couple of different options when we're figuring out how to, move forward with something. So that natural relationship development there is really big. If you don't share any strengths with somebody else, there could be a little curiosity there too, right? And that doesn't involve any kind of surface level development. It takes time to understand the strengths of the people around you, but it's a really easy way to begin a conversation with somebody and to get a good idea of maybe how they see the world, right? The second area that I think you can use your strengths really well when it comes to colleague communication development is increased collaboration. I was just having a chat with a TVG individual this morning. We were just talking about this in coaching session about increased collaboration. So sometimes if you look at your top 5 or top 10, you might see some color coding in that if you printed that offline. So maybe you have a couple of red strengths. Those are strategic thinking. So those strengths are really rooted in process and data and knowledge and understanding kind of the intellectual development of something, right? So maybe you have a couple of strategic thinking strengths, and maybe you have a couple of executing strengths, the purple. So you really like to get things done. You're motivated to accomplish and cross things off the list. Well, if you happen to be working with on a project, let's say, that's going to affect multiple people in the office, okay? And you don't necessarily have any relationship building strengths that are high for you. They're not in your top 10 or top 5. Maybe they're not in your top 10, or maybe you have 1 or 2. Could you, as a well-functioning adult, figure out how that's going to affect people in the office, this new project you're working on? You could. Might take you a little longer. It might be a little more painful for you, right? Or you can maybe look at the strengths that are represented around your team. Maybe you have somebody who's dominant in relationship building strengths, right? They have empathy as a strength, or they have relator, or maybe they have harmony. And so then, in a way to communicate better, you can walk up to that person and say, hey, if you have an extra minute, can I use your strengths? for a second, can you look at this and just give me a quick snapshot? Do you think this is going to affect everyone the same way? Do you think, how do you think people are going to take the delivery of this? Allow them to be able to use their talent, right, to help you, to collaborate, to make sure that that project runs smoothly, that it's effective, that it's well-rounded. And so that collaborative technique, we might not normally do, or if we did, it wouldn't be quite as intentional, right? You might just kind of always go to the same person over and over again because you like them, right? But which is great, and they might be awesome at helping you, but there could be some really huge untapped resources in the office of people that you haven't necessarily connected with in the past, but your strengths would be a really great boost and connection together to make that project really stand out. So those two areas, I think, to me, are the most helpful ways for you to use your strengths as a start with your colleagues in building that communication together. The second part of communication that I mentioned before was with your manager. So I work a lot with managers, right, in one-on-one coaching, and we spend a pretty significant amount of time with them coming in saying something to the degree of, I don't know how to motivate this person. I don't know what they need, right? They like to do this one project. I don't understand it. It's weird. Nobody else likes it. Like, I just don't get them, right? And so managers spend crazy amounts of time beating their head up against the wall, trying to understand somebody that they're supervising, with the end result a lot of times falling a little bit flat, right? So when I'm describing strengths to somebody, like the concept of it, I usually use this is a little bit weird, but it works so well. I usually use the visual image that your strengths are like the end of your nose. They are so close to you that you can't see them, right? They are how you work. They're how you process. They're how you see the world around you. So when it comes to explaining your talent or the needs of your strengths to other people, that's really hard, really hard. I mean, shoot, I coach people through this for a living, and I have to work at making sure that I'm communicating the needs of my strengths in the best way. And so because that's so difficult, whether or not a manager has asked an employee about the best way to provide opportunities for them or engage them, even if they did ask, it might be really difficult for an employee to come up with the right words to use that are accurate, right? So what's helpful about using your strengths, if you're a manager watching this, I'm telling you right now, strengths are the golden goose to understanding your people and figuring out ways to get them engaged. If you're not a manager, but you have a manager, this is also something you need to listen to, because this is a way that you can better communicate your needs to a manager in a way that they can actually use that, right? And it's accurate. So the first part in communication with this is that there's no guessing the needs of your people with strengths. I'm going to show you in a minute a document that I provide the vesting group and other clients of mine. If you hired a coach to come in and do something for you, they would be able to provide something similar. Not as great, of course, because they're not me, but just to help give you sort of a roadmap. But when it comes to guessing, strengths, all of our strengths have something they bring to the table that's unique and something that they need, like an environment, in order to be the most successful. When you know somebody's strengths, you no longer have to guess, right? If they have activator as a strength really high, they're going to need opportunities at work to start something, not to necessarily brainstorm, not to plan out. They need to be given the keys to put into the ignition as much as possible. That's a great way for that strength to be engaged and bring its best to the table, right? Now you think, when's the last time maybe you heard somebody say that, or you even said, if maybe that's a strength of yours to a supervisor, I need to be given opportunities to start something new. I mean, I think back to times that, I was maybe sitting with a supervisor or interviewing for a job. I would have never said anything like that, right? I would have said something like, I need open communication and I need a positive work environment, right? But I wouldn't really know uniquely to me what was needed for me to be excited and engaged. So strengths can provide you that information between manager and employee that is intentional, that's unique. And then the second part that I just did a couple of workshops on this over the past few weeks actually, is goal setting. So, a big part of a manager-employee relationship is that evaluation period, right? However often you do that, if it's quarterly, if it's yearly, hopefully part of that evaluation process for you is focused on goals. So did somebody meet their goals from last year, last quarter, or what are your new goals? And part of the workshop that I did recently on goal setting was talked about kind of the vagueness of that. So we don't really tailor goals very much. We're talking about them in an evaluation setting between manager and employee. We sort of, this is what I want to do, for next quarter, but do we talk about how specific it is to your strengths, how your strengths are going to be involved in creating that goal and executing that goal in a way that gets you excited about that. So I think strengths from manager to employee are a great way to make sure that your goals are actually being completed, that you have the desire to do it. I don't know about some of you, if you've put a goal down on an evaluation before and you loathe the goal before you even leave the evaluation. You're like, I don't want to do it. I don't even know how to do it. It's too overwhelming. No, right? It doesn't have to be that way. If you're inserting strengths into the way that your manager and employee are creating that path for you for success, for promotion, just for professional development growth, there is going to be engagement behind that because it's playing to your unique talent, right? And what gets you excited. So this is an example, like I said before, picking on myself in this one, but that I might provide to a client, but something that you can definitely kind of create and research about your own strengths to help you with that communication side. So the I bring column on the left, you can see my top 3 strengths on the far left: activator, includer, learner. So on that I bring column, that really gives you a chance to figure out how to tell people on your team, how to tell your colleagues, how to tell your manager, right, what you can do, what you can bring. And this is such a cool wake up, I think, for folks, because we tend to be really weakness fixing, right? I didn't talk about a ton of that at the beginning. We'll talk about it a little bit at the end. We're weakness fixing people for the most part. Yes. So we are constantly asking, what can I improve upon? What do I not do well? Our evaluations, speaking of, tend to be hugely based on weaknesses, right? And not necessarily on strengths. So this I bring column can feel a little strange at first. Like you're kind of coming and bragging about, let me just tell you about what I'm bringing to the table. But we need to do it. We have to do it. I want you to continue to think back to Serena Williams sitting on a tennis racket, right? Just sitting on the racket and not talking about, hey, I can absolutely dominate this sport, right? I can break records like nobody's business. Huge. What a value. I mean, what an asset to your team, your business, your colleagues, your manager, yourself, right? To acknowledge that. So strengths can help you figure out how to communicate what it is that you bring to the table. And then that needs column, strengths, like I was talking about with your manager, help you to be able to explain what you need in a particular strength, right? So if you need room to be able to engage everyone in the office, you need to be able to make sure everyone is included and have opportunities in your job to do that. That can give that communication barrier between you and your manager a break, or managers between you and your employees a break, right? Less guessing. Okay, the second area, so we talked about communication and your strengths involvement. The second area that I think is really helpful and probably what people ask the most about in strengths integration at work or on your own are teams and roles. So probably the number one question that I'll get when I'm first working with organizations or individuals is, does my job match my strengths, or do my strengths match my job? Is it a good fit? So I wanted to definitely talk about roles. And then team development too. I think for those of you who are in our webinar today who do you're a decision maker of some sort, so you're involved in creating teams, whether that's small teams, committees, sales teams, whatever it is. If you're involved in that, strengths can play a massive role in the success of team creation. If you don't do that, if you don't have the autonomy, or you're not involved in those kind of decisions, the teams that you are offering yourself to be a part of, or committees that you're asking to do, or some new initiative in the office that you'd like to head up, understanding your own talents and how they might play into that is a big part of that team development too. I wanted to also let you know, at the end of this, you're going to receive this presentation in a PDF format, so you'll be able to kind of take this with you. Some slides have kind of chunky words on them, which usually I'm not a huge fan of, but if you're going to take this and be able to sort of glance back over it at some point, I wanted you to have a little extra information. So Okay, so let's talk about roles. Your strengths, and this hopefully will help you when it comes to that confusion about seeing your strengths as labels, right? Like this is who you are. I think that's really how a lot of assessments are sort of posed to us, right? Here you are. Here's your 5 words. That's it. That's you in a nutshell, right? It's not. Your strengths are not the what. They're the how. They are how you do something. So there's really not a perfect role for a perfect set of strengths. What really I encourage you to do is look at what your role currently is, whether you enjoy it or not, and how do your strengths help you or hinder you from doing that role? Okay, so for example, if you were really high on relationship building strengths and you had a role where you sat at a desk, you really didn't see anybody else all day long, and you coded, we'll say, all day. Surface level, you would probably say, no, I don't think your job matches your strengths. If you're having relationship building strengths, which means you thrive off of that human connection, you want to do things with others, you want to collaborate, you like to feed off of the energy of other people, and you don't get a chance to do that very often, that's a good way for you to kind of sit and figure out whether or not your role works for you. But it could be, maybe there are opportunities in your role as a coder where you could involve more people, right? You really like coding, but recognize maybe there's some areas that it's not filling the needs of your strengths. So you think maybe I can join an extra committee, or maybe I can, ask to work in close proximity with another pod of people, right? And that can give me a little bit bigger of a boost. Another way that you can think about roles too, there's an individual that I've worked with recently, and she has woo really high in her strengths. And if you have woo, if you've taken StrengthsFinder and it's someone in your top 5 or top 10 and you're like, I don't know what that word is, it's made up, it sounds weird, it's very strange. So you're right on target with that. But woo is actually an acronym. It stands for winning others over. And those folks, woos really love to have new interactions with people, right? It doesn't have to be long and drawn out interactions, but new opportunities to be able to connect with somebody else, find some sort of common factor between the two of you. They get a big energy boost. They have no problem walking into a room with people that they don't know and feeling the excitement and the challenge to be able to connect with people and have some new friends by the time they walk out the door, right? So she has woo really high and was not, didn't have any opportunity to meet anybody new really in her job. So she was sort of staying in the office for the most part, maybe interacting with clients virtually every now and then, but for the most part, really sticking to the people around her office area. She was totally happy in her job, but we really realized that that was an untapped strength. She wasn't using that in the office at all, which really, at the end of the day, is a detriment to the company. You know, that's sitting on the racket, right? Not using a strength. So the organization decided to try and implement new ways that she could go out and be client-facing. Not a ton, right? Not totally redoing her role, but giving her more opportunities once or twice a month to go check in on a client that's in the area, right? Meet somebody new in their office, get to tour their facility. You should have seen, I mean, the light that like burst from her when she was able now to every now and then go out and meet somebody new in that client-facing role. Her energy level skyrocketed at work for the rest of her position because that strength was now motivated. So for you as an individual, if you're watching this just for you and not for your organization, a great exercise for you to be able to do is to write down all the specifics of your job, so all of your responsibilities, and then compare those to what your top 5 strengths are. What strengths can I use when it comes to creating meeting agendas? What strengths am I using when it comes to ordering supplies, right? Or checking to see if trucks are arriving okay. How are your strengths integrated in your actual role? And then the other part is teams. So I'm picking on some vested group people today. Surprise! Because I think that this is a really great visual way for you to figure out how strengths can play into team exercises. So in front of you, I have 5 folks and their top 5 strengths on here. This is kind of, I think, a great visual to be able to use in the workplace. I mentioned before that strengths are divided up into 4 domains or categories. So if you've taken StrengthsFinder and you got your results back and you noticed some color coding, but it didn't really make sense, There are 34 strengths altogether. They're divided into 4 categories: relationship building, which are blue; executing, which are purple. Those are strengths that like to get something done, right? They want to cross things off the list. Red are strategic thinking. Those are all up here: knowledge-based, appreciate data, critical thinking. And then the marigold, we're going to call it, however it shows up on your screen. I'm going to go with marigold. Color is influencing. So those are strengths that are involved in motivating others, in kind of keeping momentum going within a group. So let's say you are creating a team, okay, that has a specific mission. So maybe it's not a team that's always going to be together, but they have a specific project in mind. If you are a decision maker who's creating those teams, you're able to look at strengths not from a this is all that they have to contribute kind of mentality, right? Because you can have a team that shared several strengths altogether and just absolutely knocked it out of the park. But I want you to look at these specific strengths thinking from the perspective of what's the lens of each person going to look like, okay? So if you're looking at Joel, he's dominant in strategic thinking strengths and influencing strengths, right? So he's really thinking learner and futuristic. What's to come? What's the new frontier? What are we looking for that we've never done before? And what would that look like, right, at the end? How successful would it be? And who's our benchmark? Who are we going to be going up against to figure that out? You know that his perspective is going to bring that strategic thinking and the push forward, the momentum for the group. Knowing the strengths of your team allows you to look at Jennifer and say she is absolutely 100% going to be focused on how individuals are going to be affected by what we're doing, right? What is that going to look like for them? What will it feel like for them? She can adapt in that zone and figure out how adaptive will other people be able to be, right? If they're looking at this. What I'm working through with you right now and kind of looking through these 5 individuals and what they bring to the team, this is how you can use strengths on a day-to-day in the office. Or if your business isn't using strengths, this is how you can think about your own contribution to teams and groups, okay? What am I bringing to the team? What can I go in knowing, you know what, this is my zone. This is my tennis racket, right? I am Serena. I wouldn't necessarily walk into a committee meeting like yelling, I'm Serena, because I'm not sure that's going to work out for you super well, but you definitely can take some time on the forefront and look at what your talents are and focus on bringing that in instead of feeling like, you need to have all the answers for something. Use one another for our unique talents. They're natural. They're raw. You don't have to try, right? That's just absolutely where your brain naturally goes. So understanding what your role is on a team and what that looks like, incredibly important. Okay, the last part that I wanted to talk about, and then I wanted to leave time at the end for some questions. If you've had them going through here, if you have a question about a specific strength, I want to leave time for that. So the last part is navigating change. I mentioned before at the beginning, we are, in this just seismic shift of the workplace, right? So I was speaking to someone this morning that the fact that it's 2020, there's a pandemic, and we've been quarantining at home for a couple of months is just the wildest sentence I could possibly come up with, right? All of our strengths respond differently to change. And like I said at the beginning, I've been spending a lot of time doing one-on-one coaching with people on how they've made that transition via their strengths. So better understanding why they have trouble working from home, but somebody else really thrives on it, right? And maybe their home situations are really similar, so it doesn't make any sense. Or why managers have come to me saying, this guy is amazing at work. Like when we're in the office, he's cranking stuff out. He's on point. I have gotten nothing from him since we've started working from home. I don't get it. It's like he just now isn't productive and I don't understand why. Okay. All of that can be tied to strengths and understanding what they need and to be successful. And so I'm going to give you a little example. I picked 3 strengths to talk about specifically. But again, when we get to the question part, right after this, if you have a specific question about a strength in transition, in kind of COVID in the last 3 months, I'd love to talk about it. I'm going to talk about achiever, strategic, and positivity. So achiever, if you have that in your top 5 or top 10, that's the most common strength in the United States to be in the top 5 is achiever. When you think about transition in COVID specifically, Achiever did really well at the beginning, just immediately, and mostly because those little tiny distractions throughout the day of people walking up to your desk or popping in your office or, whatever, were decently gone for a lot of people, right? And so they felt like they had more bandwidth to knock things out of the park, and they were blazing through to-do lists. And then Achiever started to do this funny thing throughout the last couple of months where you might have been able to just answer somebody's question really quickly as they were walking by your desk, and then you could keep working. Now it's a Zoom call that lasts 15 minutes, or now it's a phone call that lasts 20 minutes, right? And so distractions now are maybe a little heftier, they're a little longer, they take more time. And so Achiever feels maybe like it struggled a little bit more in this last part of the quarantine because they don't have the same kind of bandwidth during the day where they could normally just have a quick conversation with somebody and it would be done. So understanding that has allowed people with Achiever to figure out, how in the workplace or how at home can I make that adjustment, right? I need a couple of different to-do lists to keep my Achiever energized because I have to wait, for a little while to get an answer from somebody where normally I could have just walked by their desk really quickly. So making some changes around that. Strategic has done incredibly well for the most part during transition because strategic is all about anticipating different ways to respond to something, right? What's the best way to move from A to B? Here are a couple of options. I know these routes won't work. And so they've anticipated a lot of the change. I joke with some strategics about how in their head when all of this transition and when we started working from home coming, all the strategics were sitting around going, could have told you. Could have told you it was coming. Saw it coming from a mile away, already planned out. My home office has been done for 5 weeks, right? Like they just anticipate the change and have some different scenarios already planned to be able to work through it. So understanding that, maybe you're strategic, right? And so some of this transition, you've kind of been sitting there thinking, well, I don't know, it didn't seem that difficult. I just sort of adjusted, right? I've got some different ways to be able to do that. Or maybe strategic is lower for you and you've been sitting there thinking, I don't understand how everybody already has like the next stage planned out. I don't get it. Or how they just sort of know that next week we're going to be doing XYZ working from home and I didn't even see that coming. And then positivity being a third one, just to kind of mention how it's done in transition. Positivity's had a harder time. That strength is almost entirely fed opportunistically. So just being around other people, celebrating the wins with others, feeling the enthusiasm around people in the office. And they don't have that, right? Because you're at home. And that virtual celebration, not quite the same, right? Virtual happy hours are the bomb. I've been encouraging a lot of people to do them because it does do a small boost of positivity. But then, you log off and then you're just kind of sitting there with your drink. And the boost enthusiasm of having that kind of dies down a little bit, and it gets sort of sad. So understanding that Achiever, strategic, and positivity have massively different responses and needs in change in what's happening with working from home. And that concept of understanding that they have different needs and changes, you can do that to anticipate the way that you're going to respond to something or the way a colleague or a manager or an employee is going to respond to something when the next time that change happens in the workplace. Hopefully not as extreme as what we're dealing with right now, but still you can have some sort of anticipation with that. Okay, so I put ouch because this is such a tough question. And I feel like it stings a little bit, but I want it to sting a little bit for you because to me, the biggest hurdle and challenge that we have when it comes to understanding your own talent and diving into that and grabbing it and getting excited about it is that we are really so focused on fixing our weaknesses, right? So do you think if I asked you, without taking strengths, right, if you haven't taken or you haven't done a lot with it, that you could tell me more about your weaknesses than you could your strengths? And even further from that, if I asked you about your colleagues, managers, if I asked you about your employees, could you tell me what your colleagues and employees don't do well in more depth than you could tell me what they do well in depth? I'm going to say probably yes. I know you don't want to say it. I know you don't want to think that it's true. But because we're so focused on figuring out how to get better at what we're not great at, that tends to be where we put the majority of our effort, right? Is understanding the weaknesses of those around us. When in reality, we're never going to hit huge potential, massive productivity, engagement, and excitement in our job if we're focusing on those areas that we lack, instead of figuring out what are more ways that I can use what I'm really great at work and in my relationships with others. Here's my contact information before we take questions, just in case. Again, this will be on the PDF that you'll receive too, so you'll be able to contact if you have any additional questions, either about coaching or specifically about strengths or specifically about your top 5. Or if you have a colleague and you know their top 5 and you just for the life of you think that they are from planet Mars, please absolutely, you can send those to me and I can help you figure out what part of Mars that they're from, because that can be a little bit helpful. So, all right, I'm going to take this off.
All right, Heidi, great job. I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
You want to take one or
yeah,
two?
Let's do it.
All right. Do your strengths change over time?
Good question. Great question. So for most of us, your top 10 to 12 strengths have never changed, which is really interesting to think about. They start to develop somewhere around ages 5 through 10 based on environment, experiences, your family life, right? And they really solidify. So if you took this assessment at 18 and then you took it again at 50, you might have some movement in that top 10 to 12 based on, life is calling you to do different things at 50 than it did at 18. But for most of us, that top 10 to 12 strengths, they have always been the same.
All right, and you kind of covered this a little bit already when you talked about change, but the question was, is there a strength that you feel will have the most, because it's almost like there's 2 changes coming up. There was the change of us getting used to the new work from home or the social distancing environment. And then when we have another change coming back to where we were, and then that change of, well, what is the new normal? There's kind of multiple aspects to that. Are there certain strengths you think need a little bit more care and feeding to get through that effectively?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to say this with a grain of salt, because individual strengths function maybe a certain way, but there's so much depth in how your strengths pair up, right? So that's something to kind of keep in mind and consider. Sometimes some strengths, maybe like discipline, might have a little bit of a harder time on the forefront when change begins to happen because there's a lack of routine. And that strength really functions best in being able to depend on a specific routine every day. So some strengths like discipline, maybe some consistency, that might have a harder pain point there at the beginning before they're able to establish something they can depend on every day. I think, if you have a lot of relationship building strengths, your success in transition is going to be doing that with others. So you can kind of think in broader terms too, making sure that you're feeding kind of the general idea of how your strengths function. And then on the opposite side, there are some strengths that do really well in transition. So adaptability is one. That strength thrives off of the day-to-day. So that's one that tends to strategic, I talked about before. That strength kind of likes to take on the challenge. Restorative likes to take on the challenge of something that's new that it's never done before, and bulldoze past that. So yeah, discipline, consistency. Futuristic sometimes actually has had a hard time during this, I think, because there's just so much unknown about what's coming that futuristic sometimes has a hard time creating the vision, right? I don't know what this is going to look like. I can't see it, right? Because I don't feel like I have enough information to figure that out. So,
especially since nobody has any real data and nobody really knows when this is all going to end. Because I have futuristic in my top 5, as you know, so I can definitely relate to that. Is there a place where you can get a list of, if you know your strengths, of what I need and what I bring? Is that on the list of 34? I'm trying to remember what that looks like.
That's not, so that specifically, like what I kind of showed on here, is something that I specifically provide. But I will tell you, Google is just, there's so much information out there. So really, I think you can probably find a lot if you put in there, strengths finder, discipline, bring, need. You probably, I'm sure there's a coach that's put a lot out there about that, or you could find some little bits about it. I'm also happy to help somebody figure that out too. So if there's a specific strength you have that you're like, I really don't have any clue what this strength means, then I can give you some suggestions. There's a great podcast called Gallup Theme Thursday that is on their 4th or 5th season now, and they have individual podcasts on each strength for every season. That's also a good way. They talk about what your strengths bring and need, so that's a good way to get that information too.
Yeah, nothing like a full hour listening to exactly what motivates or doesn't motivate you. All right, one final thing I'll ask you, just because I think this is a really important aspect of what you bring to our organization, is talk just for a couple of seconds about what a team session with you is like and what usually comes out of that.
Yeah. I love the team sessions, probably even more than individual coaching. For a team session, I would sit down with a group and map out in a couple of ways, so a couple of different visual representations of what the strengths are represented around the table and what that means for the team. So if there's, the group is really dominant in one area, then that's a way for me to help you realize most people in the room are going to go this direction. You might be missing this piece in how you're looking at a new project or how you're looking at new initiative for the organization. And then 2, one of my favorite part about working with small teams specifically in strengths represented is I usually will go around the room and identify at least one strength that each person has around the table that nobody else has represented high, so that you can focus in on what you or the person next to you is bringing that nobody else does, that is an asset, right? Not to be glossed over. So if somebody has, we were just learner, right? And in their top 5 and nobody else around the table has learner, that person is going to have energy and excitement about trying something new. Lean on that with them, right? Give them that, take the courage and saying, you know what? They really believe we can do this and they have the desire to get in there and at least try. Let's go with it. Let's pave the way for them to use that strength so the committee is doing something better with them. And those can be a variety, small team, bigger team, depending on how that.
I know I've done sessions with you, just 2 of us. And then I know we've had sessions also with 6, 7, 8. So, well, thank you, Heidi. That was excellent. I would definitely encourage anyone listening to reach out. If you don't have Heidi's information, that I know she already gave it, but you can always reach out to anybody at the Vestige Group and we'll be sure to hook you up with her. Like I said earlier, we've been using her for several years and it really has changed the dynamics with our employees interpersonally as well as from a mentoring perspective. So I really encourage you to leverage the StrengthsFinder process. And that is what we have today. And I want to thank everybody for attending and have a great rest of your week. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.